Hello everybody, my name's Zahir and welcome to my channel Plants and Paints, where today we're going to be talking about the Anthurium Clarinervium. So to start with, I'm going to give you a little introduction into the plant itself, and then we'll talk a little bit about the care tips for the plant. Okay, so the Anthurium Clarinervium is a plant that belongs to the Araceae family or Aracea family. It's an aroid plant and is an epiphyte, which means that it grows on the branches of trees. You can find it in lush tropical rainforest type areas. It attaches its roots to the branches of trees, which they use as anchor points, and then it grows in a similar manner to, let's say, orchids and bromeliads. In nature, they collect their nutrients by absorbing water, minerals and organic nutrients from the moist crevices where they attach themselves, and also from the surrounding decaying bark that is within those crevices. Another place they get their nutrients from is the dust that settles on the bark itself. I would imagine for the dust to be taken up, it will probably need like a rainfall or something like that. So when it rains, the dust becomes more soluble and they're able to take the nutrients from that up through their root system. Sorry about that. The Anthurium Clarinervium originates in the neotropics, so you're going to find it in places like South America. Mainly you're going to find it in places like Mexico, and also you can find it in places as far out as the Caribbean. The plant itself grows from about 1 to 3 feet tall, with leaves getting as thick as 1 to 2 centimeters thick, and also the leaves themselves they grow up to about 30 centimeters in length. The Anthurium itself is considered to be a foliage plant and has large, deep, lobed, heart-shaped leaves. So the big lobes around there, so deep, lobed, heart-shaped leaves with metallic silver to white veining running throughout the leaf, which I'm sure you'll agree is absolutely beautiful. This is, in any plant collection, I would suggest that this is one of the more striking plants that you're going to see. I mean, any place I've gone where I've walked around to look at plants and I've noticed this stands out like a sore thumb. It's such an amazing and beautiful looking leaf that the plant has. It's a very popular plant within the plant hobby, and although I've never actually come across them in, as an example, a garden center, if you type in on the internet, then they're quite readily available. If you look hard enough, you can find a juvenile one for quite a relatively inexpensive price as well. I mean, you can pick a juvenile up from anywhere from 20 to 30 pound, but obviously the more mature the plants get, the more expensive they actually become. So a plant like this one here, I actually paid double that amount for. I've had it for a few months. It's put off a few new leaves in that time. But yeah, I actually paid double that. Juveniles, you're looking at, coming in a 10 centimeter pot with a couple of leaves with not much detail on them. It takes quite a while for them to get to this size. So that's a general introduction into the plant. So what we're going to do now, we're going to move on to the care tips for the plant. So general maintenance and the kind of environment you want to be keeping it in. I don't know why my camera is jumping around like that, but I'm really sorry. You'll have to just excuse that. So we're going to start with lighting. The Anthurium likes to be kept in bright to medium indirect light. It doesn't like to be in direct sunlight at all, so make sure you don't put this in a window in direct sun, because if you put it in a window in direct sun, you're actually going to end up killing your plant. As I'm sure you can imagine from looking at my plant, due to the fact that they're a foliage plant, there's not much to them, so the things that can end up being damaged at quite a quick succession. So make sure that you're not keeping it in like a bright window area. I actually keep mine, I have a north facing window behind me, and the light comes in this direction, and I keep it on this side of the window. I keep it quite close to the window, but not in any form of direct sunlight, and it does get quite a bright light there, but obviously not direct. We've talked a little bit about lighting. We're now going to talk about temperature. So during the growing season for this plant, which is March through to September time, the ideal temperature range for this plant is 18 to 23. Now that doesn't mean that that's the maximum temperature it can take, because obviously a lot of places they get very, very hot. So my environment that I try to keep it in, I try to keep it at a maximum of up to 23, although it can get substantially hotter than that here during the summers. But these plants can easily tolerate up to 30 degrees. But for a healthy growth and a healthy plant, you want to keep it between 18 and 23 during the growing season. Now during the dormancy season, it shouldn't be allowed to drop below 12 degrees. You want to keep it at an average of about 15, but 12 degrees being the absolute minimum that this plant will tolerate before it starts showing you that it's unhappy and that it actually is starting to get some adverse effects from the drops in temperature. So ideally around 15, minimum of 12 degrees. Okay, we've covered temperature. We're now going to talk a little bit about humidity. So due to the plant's natural environment, as you can imagine, being that it grows in lush tropical rainforests, it actually grows in a very, very humid environment. So optimal humidity for this plant is anything up to 80% humidity in a day, although that's not something you have to exactly replicate yourself. It doesn't have to be up to 80%, but 80% is optimal for it. So trying to replicate it as close as possible will only benefit the plant. Now that's daytime humidity conditions. Now in the evening, in a tropical rainforest, you can imagine the humidity actually rises, so it goes up to 100 degrees at night time in a lot of these kind of places. So this plant at night time will do brilliantly in up to 100% humidity. But bearing in mind, you don't have to keep the humidity that high. I don't think I ever have the humidity that high. I keep it up to about 75% around where I keep all my humidity loving plants, and it seems to be doing fine there. It doesn't really go above 75 to 80% humidity, although I know that it will survive quite happily in up to 50% humidity. So there is quite a broad range, but obviously for optimal growth and optimal health, try and replicate its natural humidity range as much as possible. You can talking a little bit about humidity. We're going to talk about things that can help you with your humidity. So things like a humidifier. You can use a humidifier. If you're using a humidifier, I would suggest that you keep this plant in quite close vicinity to that humidifier. Being that it likes such high humidity, it being so close to it isn't going to damage it or cause any adverse effects in any kind of way. So the closer for this particular plant, the better. So humidifier. You can also use a misting bottle. So mist your plant on a daily or every other day basis. Being that it comes from a rainforest, in the morning naturally it would be covered in morning dew, which means that it is used to being quite moist on the outside of its leaves during a certain part of the day. So providing you're doing it in the mornings, you can pretty much mist it every day. It's quite happy. I pretty much mist mine every day, even though it's quite close to a humidifier. Other things you can do, you can put the plant on a tray of pebbles. Now putting it on a tray of pebbles and half filling that tray of pebbles with water will create a natural humid environment around the plant, and the water will evaporate naturally around it. Another thing that you can do is the shells that you get from a beach, you can put them around the bottom of the potting mix, and when you're watering the plant or misting the plant in the mornings, those shells will actually catch the water that you're actually using for watering or misting, and they will create like little reservoirs of water which will add to the humidity around the plant and help aid you in creating that ideal environment. I think I've pretty much covered humidity with the plants, and I've given you quite a bit of information as to how to replicate humidity. So I think we'll move on to watering the plant now. So when watering, make sure that the top inch of this plant is actually dry. So use your finger, or if you've got a watering gauge for your plant, use that. I just generally use my finger, so I'll stick my finger in the top inch of soil, and if down to the top inch is dry, then I generally will water this plant. Then I will water it and not make sure that it's waterlogged, because it doesn't like to be surrounded by water, because as you can imagine, being that it has growing conditions similar to orchids and bromeliads, its roots are wrapped around branches. They never generally are sitting in water. It's the main body of the plant that will sit itself in a crevice of some sort, so it will take up nutrients in a different way from that, but the roots shouldn't be left, you know, sitting in really wet conditions, because it will cause the roots to actually rot on you. So watering, just make sure it's evenly moist. You don't want to over water it or leave it sitting in water, so let any excess water run out, and just make sure that it's not waterlogged. Also, concerning watering, you want to use filtered or rainwater. I generally water all my plants with filtered water. I will leave my filtered water out for a further 24 hours before I use that for watering, just to make sure that it's giving it an opportunity to take all of the contaminants out of the water that can naturally release themselves from there. So I've talked about watering. I think we'll talk a little bit about fertilization of the plant now. There's not much to talk about concerning fertilizing the plant. I would just suggest that every month and a half to 2 months you use a balanced fertilizer at half the dilution rate, and just make sure you're not over fertilizing. That's why I would suggest, because it's such a minimalistic plant and there's not much to it other than the leaves. I would suggest, you know, keeping the fertilization down to once every month and a half to 2 months, and making sure that you're doing it at half the dilution rate, and try and use a balanced fertilizer so that it's getting an equal amount of all the nutrients that it needs. I think I've pretty much covered the fertilizing there. There's not much really more to it, so we'll go on and we'll now talk about the potting mix. Now myself, for my Anthurium, I actually use all cocoa chips. I haven't mixed it with anything else. So my plant, as you can see, it seems very happy. The few little bits that you can see on the leaves there, for instance, up here and down here, they came with the plant when I initially bought the plant. But all my new leaves, like for instance this leaf here, and there's another one over here, there's not really, you know, any adversities to them. You can't see anything that indicates any damage to the plant. So them living in cocoa chips, it seems to be very happy in it, and due to the fact that it's such a well draining potting mix, I prefer to use that for this type of plant. Alternatively, you can use things like an orchid potting mix, which also I think will be absolutely fine for this plant. It will contain, you know, extra nutrients as well. I think you'll find with an orchid potting mix you might not need to use nutrients quite as much. So for instance, if you've just recently repotted into an orchid mix, then I would suggest not even using any kind of nutrients for at least 3 months, because the orchid potting mix will contain enough nutrient of its own to sustain the plant and keep it growing healthily without you having to actually do that. Also, you can use things like peat moss, sphagnum moss. You can use a high quality, well draining potting soil, and you can use perlite. Now, if you're using a high quality, well draining potting soil, I would highly recommend that you put quite a high concentration of perlite into there, just to make sure that the potting mix is very well oxygenated. Just making sure that there's plenty of air getting to the roots, because you've got to try and remember the kind of environment that the roots are growing in naturally, so you want to try and replicate that as much as possible. And I find soil potting mixes, soil potting mixes generally can be quite dense even when they're well draining, so adding the perlite just makes sure that, you know, you've got the extra amount of oxygen able to get through to the rooting system. Any of the things that I've mentioned, I would actually be quite happy to mix them together. So just as a couple of examples, I would put the high quality potting soil and mix that with the cocoa chips, or I would mix it with the orchid potting mix, or I would mix the orchid potting mix with sphagnum moss, and so on and so forth. You can pretty much play around with all of those things that I've mentioned there, and they will work quite well together, and they will all create the right kind of potting mix environment for that particular plant. We're going to talk a little bit now about insect issues that you can come across with the plant. So generally the same as any previous videos I've mentioned, except for the fact that this plant will attract thrips as well. So you've got thrips, aphids and spider mites. Now, if you encounter any of these problems, it's nothing to despair about. They're generally problems that can be quite relatively easily treated. So you can get things like insecticidal soap, neem oil. You can use them individually, so you can get your insecticidal soap, you can make a mix with water, and you can actually just spray the plant with it. And also, if you're doing that, make sure to spray the potting mix as well, to get it down about 1 inch to 2 inches down into the soil, because generally if you've got things that are living in the soil, that's about the depth that they will go to. They won't generally go any further than that. So give the plant a good soaking, but also make sure that you've soaked the top 1 inch to 2 inches of soil, to make sure that, you know, where eggs and things like that are laying, you're able to get rid of that too. And also you've got things like neem oil. Now, neem oil, you can get like a makeup sponge or a makeup pad, and you can make a little mix of neem oil. You can use it neat, or you can mix it with water. You can even put it inside the insecticidal soap, so you're doing like a 2-in-1 treatment. But if you're just using neem oil on its own, then just wipe the leaves over with it. Make sure you give the plant a good wiping over, and that generally will kill any of the above mentioned insects as well. And then you've got the spider mites. Now, the treatments that I've mentioned already will deal with spider mites, but just as a bonus, I know I've mentioned this in previous videos, but you know, trying to keep things as natural as possible when treating insect problems is always going to be less stressful for your plant. So being that this plant is such a humidity lover, spider mites absolutely hate it. So if you find that your plant's not got enough humidity around it and you've got spider mites, just raise the humidity, and naturally that will kill off the spider mites, because spider mites just can't tolerate living in high humid environments. So I think I've pretty much covered any insect problems with you there. So what I'm going to do now for the final part of the video is I'm going to talk about the toxicity of this plant. Because a lot of people keep pets at home and you might have a dog or a cat, or you may even have both, I thought it's quite important that I talk about this plant, because this plant can be really quite toxic to your pets. So this plant actually contains calcium oxalate crystals, so for it to have an effect on your pet, in particular your cat or your dog, your pet has to actually ingest the plant. So it has to physically be trying to eat the plant or have actually eaten a part of the plant. Now these crystals that I've mentioned, they're actually very, very damaging, and they can cause a lot of problems for your pet. So you need to be very careful when you do have a pet in your house and you decide to add one of these to your collection. I have a cat. You would have seen on my Instagram pictures yesterday, my cat was grabbing at the flower spike that was on this plant, and that was only due to the fact that I'd moved it to a place where I could take a picture. This plant isn't generally in a place where my cat is able to get even near it. I keep it behind other plants and I keep it raised, and where it's raised my cat can't actually get to it. So it can actually cause cardiac arrhythmia, which is like irregular beating of the heart. So that can actually cause heart attacks as well. So you want to make sure that if you've got an animal, you're keeping it well out of reach of that animal, because the last thing you want is for your beloved pet, your cat or your dog, to end up having a heart attack just for something so silly as having eaten a bit of this leaf. The other symptoms that it can cause is pain in the mouth and throat. So if you notice that your cat's off of his food or your dog's off of their food, I would definitely check to see if there's been any tampering with the plant, because that can be a sign to you that your cat has actually ingested some of the plant, and you just want to make sure that that hasn't happened. And if it has, you might want to consider taking your pet down to the vets. Now, you know, people, despite the toxicity of the plants and having pets, they still will want to keep them. I happen to be one of those person. It's not irresponsibility, you know, providing you are responsible about where you keep that plant in relation to where your pets can get to, then, you know, you can generally avoid having any issues. But keeping an eye out for these things. Also, it can cause diarrhea. So if your cat's got diarrhea just out of nowhere and there's nothing to suggest that your cat is ill for any other reason, then again, check your plants to make sure that your cat's not been having a little nibble or your dog's not been having a little nibble. And also it can cause really, really severe intestinal pains and problems. So just keep an eye out for these things if you do have pets at home. You know, as much as we all love our pets, we don't want to be responsible for causing them such pain and anguish. You know, I do my best with plants that I do have which are toxic to my cat, to keep that well out of reach of my cat, which so far has been really, really good. And to be honest, my cat, from what I've noticed over the few years that I've had him, he's not interested in my plants other than a couple of my calatheas, which are close to where he sits on the sofas, and he just batters the leaves backwards and forwards. Other than that, I've never seen him put a leaf in his mouth or anything like that. So I just want to put your mind at rest that, you know, I don't put my pet in a situation where I'm putting him in any kind of harm. Okay, I think I've pretty much covered everything concerning this plant. The Anthurium Clarinervium was quite a difficult plant to research because there's not a lot of information about it on the internet. So, you know, I had to visit quite a lot of different places to gain the information that I have given to you today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you to all my Instagram subscribers for actually voting for this video. The votes were carried out last week, and actually this drew with the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. And I did say last week that I would do a video on the care and maintenance of this plant. So thank you again to everybody for voting for this video through my Instagram account. If you're not aware, my Instagram account is also Plants and Paint, so feel free to come and have a look through my Instagram account. You can see my full collection of plants there. If you've liked today's video, please don't forget to leave a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already and you've enjoyed the content, please make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you can be notified of future videos. I upload a video every week, sometimes twice a week. Like for instance, if I pop out to a garden centre or a nursery, I'll take you out on that journey with me, just to show you prices and what kind of things they have in stock at that particular time, and just to show you a different environment instead of sitting in my living room every time we have a conversation. Don't forget to leave comments in the comment box. I do enjoy reading all of your comments, and I will respond to every single one of them. Now, that is whether they're negative or positive. I don't take negative comments as, you know, insulting. I like to know if I've said or done something wrong, so please don't feel that you can't approach me about something like that. You know, as much as anything, I'm constantly learning about my hobby. I just thought it's nice that I share the love that I have for my hobby with all the people who want to learn about it at the same time. I also thought that it would be a good idea that next week for my video, if I give you an opportunity to choose what kind of plants you want to learn about. So if you go to one of my previous videos where I did a house tour of my plants, then you can actually see what plants I have, and if there's something in there that you want to learn about, then actually leave that in the comments and I will add that to the vote on Instagram that I put up. I will generally pick 3 different plants to choose from for my subscribers, and they will get to pick out of those 3 plants. Or if there are plants in my collection that you want to learn about that I haven't already spoken about, then please, you know, add that into the comments, and I'll be sure to add that to the list of the plants that I put up for voting for my next week's video. So again, thank you to everyone for tuning in for my video for the Anthurium Clarinervium. I hope you've enjoyed the content of my video. I've really enjoyed making this video for you. I do like a challenge, and like I said, this was quite a difficult video to get enough information about to actually make it worthwhile, and I did manage to get it done. I look forward to making another video for you next week, and please don't forget, if you've enjoyed the video, to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and please pop over to my Instagram account and check out my Instagram account to see my plant collection and, you know, all the things that I generally like to keep concerning my plants. Thank you everybody for tuning in. My name's Zahir, this is Plants and Paints, and I will see you again next week. Take care. Bye bye.